Hi, my name is Sonia. This video is all about recommendations that I have for the Framed Art Reading Challenge. This whole readathon is being hosted by Heather Gregg, Hannah's Books, Lindy's Magpie Reads, and Greg at Another Bibliophile Reads. And so I am going to link all of their contact information below, as well as the prompts for this readathon. This is such a wonderful way to highlight different art forms as they relate to our reading, or just kind of considering art in general that does not really include books themselves as like the medium. I don't even know if what I'm saying is right, because a lot of the things I want to talk about today are recommendations of books to read about art, and all of it is visual art. And I guess I'm really drawn to visual art. I really love photography. I love looking at paintings. I love oil paintings. I love portraits and landscapes, and how artists work to integrate different ideas into their work that has nothing to do with the written word necessarily. So I have a few examples, a few suggestions of novels, and one work of nonfiction that I really loved that talk about art. So I'm just going to kind of jump right in. The first book I'd like to talk about is The Woman Upstairs by Claire Messud. And this is a novel about a woman I think she's nearing 40, and kind of evaluating her life. And she is a visual artist. She creates dioramas. The subject matter of her dioramas are based on artists and poets like Emily Dickinson and Alice Neel, the painter, and other women artists, and people that felt like they were outside the bounds of their society, or people who were wondering, will my art ever matter? And so she creates the main character of this novel, The Woman Upstairs, creates these little shadow boxes of the rooms where the artists created their work. And I thought this was so innovative. I love this novel. I feel like it really got some bad publicity at the very beginning, because when the book was coming out, Messud was being interviewed by a critic or a reporter, and was asked, your character seems so angry. Why would anyone want to be friends with this character? And essentially had an outburst of her answer. Her answer was just so wonderful. So, okay, I found the offending article. It's Publishers Weekly, and it was written April 29th, 2013. And so here's the question as it was posed. I wouldn't want to be friends with Nora, would you? Her outlook is almost unbearably grim. Here was Claire Messud's answer. For heaven's sake, what kind of question is that? Would you want to be friends with Humbert? Would you want to be friends with Mickey Sabbath, Salim Sinai, Hamlet, Oedipus, Oscar Wilde, Antigone? Any of the characters in The Corrections? Any of the characters in Infinite Jest? Any of the characters in anything Pynchon has ever written, or Martin Amis, or Orhan Pamuk, or Alice Munro, for that matter? Oh, that was prescient. If you're reading to find friends, you're in deep trouble. We read to find life in all its possibilities. The relevant question isn't, is this a potential friend for me, but is this character alive? Nora's outlook isn't unbearably grim at all. Nora is telling her story in the immediate wake of an enormous betrayal by a friend she has loved dearly. She is deeply upset and angry. But most of the novel is describing a time when she felt hope, beauty, elation, joy, wonder, anticipation. These are things these friends gave her. And this is why they mattered so much. Her rage corresponds to the immensity of what she has lost. It doesn't matter, in a way, whether all those emotions were the result of real interactions or a fantasy. She experienced them fully, and in losing them has lost happiness. I just love that answer. So this novel has really stuck with me, and in particular, the descriptions of the art really stuck with me too. So if this makes you at all the least bit curious, I just highly recommend this book. I think it really it wasn't as well received as it should have been, and it was fantastic. So I thought I would read the passage about Alice Neel. Alice Neel was a figurative painter. I think she worked in oils. I got to see this exhibit many, many years ago. It was a retrospective of her career. She didn't find any kind of notoriety about her paintings until she was like well into her elderly age. And so the whole time she was painting through her life, she was waiting and wondering if she would ever be given the recognition that she felt she deserved. And I also watched a biography or a documentary about her too. So she's kind of in my head because I actually got to experience seeing the paintings. But here is the description of the diorama of the Alice Neel room that Nora, the protagonist of The Woman Upstairs, created. The Alice Neel room was to be the sanatorium suicide ward in a small town, Pennsylvania, where she was locked up after her breakdown. She'd lost her two little girls, one to diphtheria and the other to her fickle Cuban husband who'd promised to send for her but never did, and, leaving their daughter with his parents, went on to Paris alone. I wanted to get into the barren room, the memory of her little girls, but also I wanted to slip into the corners, the ghosts of her future sons, the two devoted and adored boys who stuck by her through thick and thin, through so much thin, and at so great a cost to themselves, as she grew old and fat and plain, and was all the time poor, so long unrecognized, obsessed with her work, piling up her unsold canvases in the narrow hallway of her grimy walk-up apartment. But through it all, she'd have those boys, both of whom would flee Bohemia for the professions, solid and bourgeois and aggressively uneventful in their days, carrying in them all the pains of her life, of her lost youth and their unknown lost siblings, but never abandoning her, not ever. And somehow it would have seemed wrong in the new golden light of love with which I saw the world illuminated to make my Alice's room reflect only the nadir, her darkest isolation, when she felt forsaken by life and by art and by love. I still wanted my rows of white, draped iron beds, the high white windows unadorned, the swabbed white linoleum floor. I wanted her white nightgown, torn at the shoulder, her hands to her ears in a monk-like scream. But I wanted the colors of Cuba, of motherhood, of the future. Outside the windows, high up the walls, like shoots coming up through the earth, the promise of spring. I love that passage. It really evokes for me a memory of reading this book, even though it's been many, many years since I've read it. I think I read it when it came out in 2013, so it's been like 12 years. 11 years? It's been about 11 years since I've read it, but I still, the descriptions of the art in the book has really implanted itself in my mind so that I remember the novel more fully. And this was just a really wonderful novel. The next book I wanted to talk about, which I remember less, but it's still, part of it really stuck with me, and this was this artwork, is called On Such a Full Sea by Chang-Rae. And this is a book about kind of, there was some kind of pandemic, a lot of people died, and so societies completely shifted after this pandemic came, and the United States is now a different country. It has been taken over by fascism, and there's a real restriction on the movement of the people of the United States. And so everything has changed. Everything is like a tilted view of America through the eyes of this catastrophe. And what I remember about it is it's written in first person plural. So it's we did this, we did that. There's a collective mind. And in one part of this novel, the protagonist, there is a singular protagonist, even though she speaks in, the we of it all. But she escapes for a while, and she ends up kind of a prisoner in a school or something with a bunch of other girls her age. She's a child. And the girls that are being held captive in this house have created this collective artwork on the wall that is a mural of their experience. And so they communicate with one another through this mural and through this depiction of art. And I wanted to read a passage about this and just realize that this is just one excerpt of a really interesting novel, pretty dire, and it's I wouldn't call it optimistic, but there is a spirit to it, and you do find some glimmer of hope in the lives of these people and through this protagonist. But here is the excerpt. There's always something entrancing about an image on a wall. Perhaps it's because it's frameless, threatening to break wider, maybe free. From the youngest to the oldest, we know its purpose, which is to inspire and incite and celebrate, maybe question and even criticize. And then, of course, simply to record a version of what has happened, or should have happened, were our world a more genial place. And seeing those splashes of color along with others, or the thought of onlooking others, is totally different from seeing the same images alone, the former sensation, when it is right, akin to sharing a long-harbored secret. What we have perhaps not considered enough is the maker and why she's done what she's done, whether it was some unexplainable artistic urge or else an impetus of conscience. And then, most important, what the making made her think and feel, whether back in an alleyway of Memoir or deep inside a charter villa. For did it allow her to feel larger, more connected? Did it settle a self-quarrel? Did it offer her liberty from some private boundary that heretofore she had not understood or even noticed? Because when we look at the final great works of 6, and so the girls were numbered, they didn't have names, they just had numbers. Because when we look at the final great work of 6, as well as the broader field coloring efforts of the others that ended up completely covering not just the white space of the partly finished walls, but the entire blank run of the remaining others, we can conclude whatever it signifies is no more important than that they did it without pause, hardly eating or sleeping or much concurring with one another, caught up as they were in the virulent bloom of a fever. So this passage talks a lot about the process of creating art and why, what is its implication, and is the implication more important than the actual process of creation? So that was one question that comes out of the novel, and it stuck with me. This is one I would definitely like to revisit because I don't remember how it ends, for one thing, just the idea of this artwork, and then this was kind of like the climactic part of the novel is where she is in this particular circumstance. Another novel that I loved very much, and I've read several times, that features a woman artist is Cat's Eye by Margaret Atwood. This is such a very good book it's about so many things. It's about girlhood, it's about childhood friendships, it's about bullying, it's about trauma. And then it's about taking all of these things from childhood and then creating works of art that are expressive of the growth that the artist has had since those things happened, and yet how deeply those events of childhood have embedded in her psyche and come out through the artwork. So I had 2 short passages to read. One is about art that the protagonist creates when she's a child. Today, says Miss Stewart, we are going to draw what we do after school. The others hunch over their desks. I know what they will draw. Skipping ropes, jolly snowmen, listening to the radio, playing with a dog. I stare at my own paper, which remains blank. Finally, I draw my bed with myself in it. My bed has a dark wooden headboard with curlicues on it. I draw the window, the chest of drawers. I color in the night. My hand, holding the black crayon, presses down harder and harder until the picture is almost entirely black, until only a faint shadow of my bed and my head on the pillow remains to be seen. I look at this picture with dismay. It isn't what I meant to draw. It's unlike everyone else's picture. It's the wrong thing. Miss Stewart will be disappointed in me. She'll tell me I have more between the ears than that. I can feel her standing behind me now, looking over my shoulder. I can smell her smell of hand lotion and the other smell that is not tea. She moves around so I can see her bright, blue, wrinkly eyes looking at me over the top of her nurse's mask. For a moment she says nothing, then she says, not harshly, "Why is your picture so dark, my dear?" "Because it's night," I say. This is an idiotic answer. I know that as soon as it's out of my mouth. My voice is almost inaudible even to me. "I see," she said. She doesn't say I've drawn the wrong thing, or that surely there's something else I do after school besides going to bed. She touches me on the shoulder briefly before continuing down the aisle. Her touch glows briefly like a blown-out match. Then there's this second scene that I'd like to talk about. It's near the end of the book, and the artist, the protagonist of this novel, has become a famous painter. And there is a retrospective of her art that is being held, I think, in Toronto. That's not an important detail. It doesn't matter. And so this is a description of the final painting in the retrospective. The last painting is Unified Field Theory. It's a vertical oblong, larger than the other paintings. Cutting across it, a little over a third up, is a wooden bridge. To either side of the bridge are the tops of trees, bare of leaves, with a covering of snow on them, as after a heavy, moist snowfall. This snow is also on the railing and struts of the bridge. Positioned above the top railing of the bridge, but so her feet are not quite touching it, is a woman dressed in black, with a black hood or veil covering her hair. Here and there on the black of her dress or cloak there are pinpoints of light. The sky behind her is the sky after sunset. At the top of it is the lower half of the moon. Her face is partly in shadow. She is the virgin of lost things. Between her hands, at the level of her heart, she holds a glass object, an oversized cat's eye marble with a blue center. Underneath the bridge is the night sky as seen through a telescope. Star upon star, red, blue, yellow, and white, swirling nebula, galaxy upon galaxy, the universe in its incandescence and darkness, or so you think. But there are also stones down there, beetles and small roots, because this is the underside of the ground. At the lower edge of the painting, the darkness pales and merges to a lighter tone. The clear blue of water, because the creek flows there, underneath the earth, underneath the bridge, down from the cemetery, the land of the dead people. So, I think throughout this novel, there are descriptions of the art that the protagonist is creating. It's a very psychological novel, and it's just so much about girlhood in a certain time and a certain place. I think probably taking place in the 40s and 50s, the childhood of the girl. It's surely a snapshot in time with the written word to describe these visual arts. The last book I'd like to talk about is called Hold Still by Sally Mann, a memoir with photographs. And so this covers childhood, it covers her in-laws, and a really kind of horrible crime story that they're involved in. And it involves her exploring the South where she grew up and reckoning with race and her place in it and her kind of blindness to racism until she just finally has some kind of awakening. Then there's a section where she goes to a body farm and takes photographs of decomposing human bodies to understand and make some kind of art or sense out of the human form and the return to nature. And so there's just all these different chapters that are part of her life, part of her photography career. She's a very famous photographer. And the one I wanted to talk about, I'm going to try and find some photographs online to insert here so you can really see them. I have them here in the book, but I don't think they'll really show up very well on camera. Where she is in the South and she wants to take photographs of the legacy of slavery through kind of landscape photography. So playing with exposures and different techniques with the camera, and then the developing of the film to create an effect that will evoke an emotion. So she's on this trip. She's on a road trip. She's by herself. As always, I picked the least traveled, most remote roads, pale blue lines on the map, certain in my bones of the memories residing there. Driving through those vine-hung dirt roads, the slender grasses on the verge bent with dust, I was improbably enough listening to Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness on tape. Though a world apart from Africa, it was impossible for me not to think of the misery extracted at every turn in these roads, just as it had been impossible for Marlowe to paddle up the Congo unaware of the groves of death lying within the shadows along the river bank. For me, the Deep South was haunted by the souls of the millions of African Americans who built that part of the country with their hands and with the sweat and blood of their backs. I was moving among shades, aware always of their presence. Flannery O'Connor once said that the South is Christ-haunted, but I say it's death-haunted, pain-haunted, cruelty-haunted, just haunted. Period. I knew my pictures were haunted too, but in a different way from the ones I had made closer to home. I had come south looking not so much for the scars of the Civil War, but for something even more fundamental and paradoxically more elusive. The pictures I wanted to take were about the rivers of blood, of tears, and of sweat that Africans poured into the dark soil of their thankless new home. I was looking for images of the dead as they are revealed in the land and in its adamant, essential renewal. Not the whole memoir is not that harrowing, but I thought it was really evocative of trying to find history through photography and trying to find history through just going the places where history happened and trying to make sense of it somehow through the landscape. So these are some suggestions that I have for really interesting art books, and I love this whole readathon of reading art books, and I want to go through some of the things that I have and see what I can find. I'm definitely going to read Thunderclap. I can't remember the name of the author. I will put it right here. But Angelia just spoke so highly of it, and so did Lindy of Lindy's Magpie Reads. And I definitely want to sit down and explore that book as part of the readathon. So these are my suggestions. Good luck. Please participate in this if you want to. It's such a very interesting way of looking at reading through art, or looking at art through reading. So I think I'm losing my train of thought, so I better go. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.